Mobility. I believe that is the cause and solution to all of our problems. So my name is Colleen Szymanik, and I work for Comcast. And currently, we have over 14 million access points in our field right now. With those kinds of numbers, I would say that mobility is definitely something that I'm interested in. So what if I told you this wasn't some sort of weird vision test, but this actually was a representation of each one of these circles represented an access point for a small subset of data. Actually, this is about a week's worth of data for about 550 access points in the Boston metro area. So what I did was I took, we have a passive optical tap that's looking at header data and at a controller aggregation point, so to speak. And what we're doing is we're basically breaking down that data into 5-minute files or segments. And from that, I basically looked at every single access point that saw associations and counted them. And then I also counted the maximum, the peak up and the peak down during that 5-minute window. So this is a tableau graph. And as you could see, actually I don't know how well you could see this or not, but if you mouse over some of the circles, it gives you a little bit drilled down data into it. So I can get an AP MAC, and I can get the peak ingress and egress, and I can get the amount of sessions that I saw, or the amount of times I saw action over that course of the week. So over 1,600 times, and I'm seeing 1,900 or 1,676 meg up and or download and 264 meg upload. And what I also did was, just for ease, so there wasn't colors all over the place, I gave a threshold, I bucketed, so to speak. So aggregate traffic for the week, if I saw from 0 to 5 meg, it was a red circle. If I saw from 6 meg to 100 meg, it was a yellow circle. And if I saw over 100 meg, it was a green circle. Just kind of gives some idea. Here's a little bit more of a smaller window here, where it's like one of the larger red circles that I'm looking at right now. So 129 times I saw associations active on there, but throughout the entire week, the most I pushed up was 3 meg total up and down. That might be something we might want to look at. So we can keep going on with this, and this is fine, but what does this have to do with mobility? You know, it doesn't matter what your size is, we need to start thinking about what can we capture. So this is not another trick and not another vision test. This is, there's some dots and lines, but, could this be a representation of what mobility looks like? Could this? So I started thinking about some basic principles of graph theory and distance vector algorithms. Maybe there's something there, right? So I started to think, can I prove that? Well, when I think of proofs, I think of math, right? What do I know? I'm going to state that first. Well, I know I have physical plant or access points, right? And I know that the clients are the ones that are making all the decisions, regardless of device or OS, right? And where to move and when to move, right? And I will also state that what I really care about is watching them move, right? So some of the other things that I do want to point out that I know, but I also don't want to delineate that in this search, right? So I'm not going to be counting the amount of times when somebody moves from 2.4 to 5 on the same AP. I'm going to disregard that. I'm not going to count the amount of times or when somebody moves between SSIDs on the same AP. Not counting that. And I'm also going to assume that I will keep and retain the same IP address for V4, V6, what have you, as I can move from APs. And if you'd like a conversation about that, which I don't have more than 10 minutes of, I'm happy to keep talking about that, because that is a passion of mine. Anyway, so what am I trying to solve? Well, yesterday, during the big data seminar yesterday, I couldn't help but saying client experience, because I really think that is a very accurate measure. But I don't really necessarily want to alter it. We have some tools out there. There's a bunch of RRM that people do really well, and I'm not trying to delve into that area. Do I need to understand the patterns? What about clients? But I think ultimately it comes down to, what do I have on my network? How can I understand what that user experience looks like on the network when clients are moving? Okay? Well, if I'm thinking about that, I think about time, right? One cannot create time, one of those facts. But how efficiently and how effectively can I use that time? Right? So how long does it take me to get data? How long does it take me to move from access point to access point? How long does it take for an access point to be able to send and receive data back and forth from a client? Well, let's look at where I can measure. From the network side of things, I started talking earlier about throughput being an active measure. Okay, so could I have served more? Did I handle peak? Did I handle load? Well, I actually only, if I'm looking at data this way, I can only watch what I'm being asked. But how effectively could I have measured that peak during that time? Interesting. Wi-Fi is bursty traffic. So some of the ways that we're looking at measuring is we're basically taking max throughput or just bursts and just looking at the maximums. That's kind of all I know that I was effectively able to use during that time, that burst, and was able to send or receive data. Where am I at? OK. Measuring data from the radio. Well, I know when the radio is busy, and I know when the radio is either having problems, but I really want to kind of understand how long it takes to connect in general, which I have. But I also want to understand how long it takes to move from AP to AP. So Andrew's blog, a little while back, when I was doing some research on this, I started looking at. He did very nice pieces, and he has this beautiful call flow that I decided to swipe from him. Give him credit, of course, because it's a very lovely diagram. So what I care about is, hey, I'm on an old AP. I'm using sending and receiving data. Then all of a sudden, I start probing to the new AP. And I have to go through my onboarding. I have to authenticate, and I have to associate. And then I could start sending data back and forth after that process is complete. Right? How long does that take? What do I measure? Right? I really want to understand how long that takes to go in between. This is an effective measure, and it's an important measurement that we need to consider. OK, so I'm kind of all over the place. Let's kind of reel it in. So measuring the data of a session was kind of where I was going to try to see how my theory works. Session data, there's a lot. As I told you, we have over 14 million access points in the field. There's a lot of sessions from that, a lot of sessions from that. So what I basically did was started taking some data, and I narrowed down some of the longer sessions of the day and started looking at how often a client moves back and forth and moves all around and kind of goes, am I doing this ping pong thing, or am I oscillating back and forth? So I started kind of trying to understand really what's happening on these moves, right? And then it started getting kind of complicated. These strings were long. So then I'm like, OK, well, maybe I can kind of crush it down to a game theory. So how about if I just break it down into tuples, right? So from APA to APB, or AP1 to 2, what is the measure from the last time when I see a data packet on AP1 for a client to the next time when I see a data packet on AP2? Maybe I'm getting closer. Well, so I've already figured out that I can watch and understand when all of a sudden I see data, but is that really effective in understanding mobility? Well, last year I started, I was at a couple other conferences, and we were looking around, and a couple of the pretty popular application developers, like Facebook and things like that, were basically saying that they were taking full network stack in their applications. I'm like, that's interesting. I bet you that's probably going to give me some problems along the way. But nonetheless, that kind of sits in the back of my head as I'm thinking about this. So what if all of a sudden applications started working during a mobility move for some things and then broke for something else? So what if all of a sudden I couldn't get effective web traffic, but Outlook was working fine, or something along those lines? So I started trying to understand what that meant and what I can measure to understand what kind of data I would have. So this brings an interesting point. So now I know when my last packet is from AP1. I know when I'm sending data to AP2. But what I really kind of want to start looking at is some successful return traffic. I kind of want to know that that next session is instantiated properly and that the user is effectively using the network at that time. So that's some of the things that we're trying to take back from this at this point in time. This is not a finished project, and this will always be a work in progress, but I'm happy to discuss it offline or here if anyone has any questions about it. Thanks.